The stars looked like scattered diamonds against the black void of space. And Princess Valith Sorinkai watched them from the Vayura observation deck of the royal cruiser. Ascendant light with a feeling of deep exhaustion. In her chest, she had spent 3 long weeks at the diplomatic summit on Kethra Prime, listening to endless debates about trade routes and territorial boundaries. And now all she wanted was to return home to the crystal spires of the Etherian Dominion. Her reflection stared back at her from the reinforced glass, and she studied her own features with tired eyes. Like all Etherians, Valith stood tall and elegant, her skin pale and smooth like polished marble that seemed to glow with a soft inner light. Her eyes shifted through colors like distant galaxies, moving from deep purple to brilliant blue depending on her mood. And right now, they held the gray tint of weariness. The Etherians had ruled their sector of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they considered themselves the most advanced and civilized species in known space. They lived for centuries, their minds sharp and their bodies graceful, and they looked upon younger species with a mixture of pity and gentle condescension. Valith had grown up believing these things without question, for this was simply the way of the universe. Your Highness, a soft voice spoke from behind her, and Valith turned to see her chief attendant, Morale, approaching with careful steps. Morale was older than Valith by 200 years, and her luminescent skin glowed with the warm golden hue that came with age and wisdom. You should rest, Morale continued, her voice carrying the musical quality common to all Etherian speech. We are still many hours from home, and you have barely slept since the summit began. Valith offered a small smile and nodded. Knowing that Morale spoke the truth, I will try, she answered. But my mind refuses to quiet itself. Before Morale could respond, the ship shuddered violently, and both women stumbled as alarms began to scream throughout the vessel. Red emergency lights flooded the observation deck, casting harsh shadows across the walls, and Valith felt her heart begin to race with sudden fear. What is happening? She demanded, but Morale looked just as confused and frightened as she felt. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, and Valith heard the distant sound of explosions somewhere in the lower decks. Through the observation window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Ships were emerging from the darkness of space, ugly vessels covered in spikes and jagged armor, and she recognized them immediately from her study's Kethvori raiders. The Kethvori were insectoid creatures, brutal and savage, who made their living through piracy and slavery across the outer regions of the galaxy. They rarely ventured this close to Etherian space, and Valith could not understand why they would risk such an attack on a royal vessel. More explosions rocked the ship, and Valith heard the sound of weapons fire growing closer. Captain Vorith's voice crackled through the communication system, strained and desperate. All hands, we are being boarded. Royal Guard to defensive positions. Protect the princess at all costs. Morale grabbed Valith's arm and began pulling her toward the door. We must get you to safety, Your Highness. The escape pods are on the lower deck. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and chaos, passing crew members who rushed in every direction with panic in their eyes. Valith saw members of the Royal Guard engaging the Kethvori boarders, their elegant energy weapons flashing against the crude but deadly firearms of the raiders. The Kethvori were terrifying to behold, standing on 4 powerful legs with 2 additional arms ending in sharp claws. Their heads were covered in hard chitin plates, and their mandibles clicked and clattered as they advanced through the ship with murderous intent. One of the guards fell before Valith's eyes, and she felt sick as the raiders trampled over his body without a second glance. More guards joined them as they fled, forming a protective circle around the princess. But the Kethvori seemed endless for every raider that fell. 2 more appeared from the smoke and shadows. We cannot hold them, one of the guards shouted, his voice tight with fear. Get the princes to the pods now. They reached the escape pod bay just as a group of HFY burst through a side corridor. The guards turned to fight, and Valith watched in horror as they fell one by one against the overwhelming numbers. Morale pushed Valith toward the nearest pod, her usually calm face twisted with desperate determination. "Go, Your Highness. You must survive. I will not leave you," Valith cried, but Morale was already sealing the pod door between them through the small window. Valith saw her faithful attendant pick up a fallen guard's weapon and turn to face the approaching raiders. The pod launched automatically, and Valith screamed as she watched the ascendant light grow smaller behind her. She pounded against the window, tears streaming down her face, but there was nothing she could do. The royal cruiser hung wounded in space, smoke and fire pouring from dozens of breaches in its hull. And then it was gone as the pod's emergency systems engaged and sent her hurtling through the void at maximum speed. Valith did not know how long she drifted, her mind numb with shock and grief. The pod's navigation system had been damaged in the hasty launch, and she could only sit and wait as the small vessel carried her to an unknown destination. She thought of Morale and the guards who had died to save her, and she felt a crushing weight of guilt settle upon her shoulders. They had given everything for her, and she had done nothing but run. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the pod began to slow, and Valith saw a massive structure growing larger through the viewport. It was a space station, but unlike any she had ever seen, where Etherean stations were elegant and beautiful. This place looked cobbled together from 100 different sources, a chaotic jumble of metal and machinery that sprawled across the void like some giant mechanical tumor. The pod's emergency beacon had apparently drawn attention, for a tractor beam seized the small vessel and pulled it toward one of the station's many docking ports. Valith tried to access the pod's communication system, but it was dead, and she could only wait as she was dragged into the unknown. The pod landed with a harsh jolt, and Valith heard the hiss of atmosphere equalizing outside. She straightened her torn and dirty robes, trying to compose herself despite the fear that gripped her heart. She was an Etherean princess, and she would face whatever came next with dignity. The pod door opened, and Valith stepped out into a corridor that made her skin crawl with disgust. The walls were covered in grime and rust. The lights flickered constantly, and the air smelled of chemicals and decay. Creatures of a dozen different species moved through the corridor, and they all stopped to stare at her with hungry eyes. Valith recognized some of them from her xenobiology studies, but many were strange and frightening, and none of them looked friendly. A large reptilian creature stepped forward, its yellow eyes fixed on Valith with obvious interest. "Whoa!" "Well," it hissed, its voice like gravel scraping against metal. "What do we have here? An Etherean, lost and alone on Nexus 7? Nexus 7. Valith felt true terror grip her heart as she recognized the name. Nexus 7 was a lawless frontier station at the edge of known space, a place where criminals and outcasts gathered far from the reach of any authority. No Etherean had set foot on this station in centuries, for it was considered far too dangerous for civilized beings. "I am Princess Valith Sorenkai of the Etherean Dominion," she declared, forcing strength into her voice that she did not feel. "I demand safe passage and communication with my people." The creatures around her burst into harsh laughter, and the reptilian's grin widened to show rows of sharp teeth. "A princess!" it exclaimed with mocking delight. "Oh, this is wonderful news. Do you know how much an Etherean royal is worth on the slave markets, little princess?" Valith backed away, but there was nowhere to run. She was surrounded by predators, alone and injured, on a station where no one would care about her royal blood. And somewhere behind her, she knew the HFY were coming. She had seen a tracker device attached to her pod just before landing, blinking its silent signal into the void. Help was not coming, and Valith realized with cold certainty that she might not survive the night. Valeth ran through the twisting corridors of Nexus 7, with her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged animal trying to escape behind her. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the reptilian creature and its companions, their laughter echoing off the grimy metal walls. As they gave chase, she had managed to slip away during a brief moment of confusion, when two rival gangs began arguing over who would claim her. But she knew her freedom would not last long. The station was a maze of corridors and chambers, and Valeth had no idea where she was going. Every turn looked the same. Every passage led to another junction of rusted metal and flickering lights, and the faces she passed offered no help. Some watched with amusement as she fled, while others reached out with grasping hands. That she barely avoided an Etherean princess was a rare prize on a station like this, and everyone wanted a piece of her. She turned down a narrow passage and found herself in what appeared to be a cargo bay, filled with stacked crates and abandoned machinery. Valeth ducked behind a large container and pressed herself against the cold metal, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. Her elegant robes were torn and stained now, and a cut on her forehead dripped blood down her face. She looked nothing like a princess anymore. But that did not matter here. These creatures did not care about dignity or status. They only cared about profit. Minutes passed in silence, and Valeth allowed herself a small moment of hope. Perhaps she had lost them. Perhaps she could find somewhere to hide until she figured out what to do. But then she heard the click of mandibles, and her hope turned to ash in her chest. The HFY had found her. 4 of them entered the cargo bay, their compound eyes scanning the space with mechanical precision. They moved on their 4 powerful legs with unsettling speed, their clawed arms held ready to grab and tear. The leader was larger than the others, its chitin armor scarred from countless battles, and it spoke in the harsh, clicking language of its kind before switching to common galactic speech. "Come out, little princess," it called, its voice a rasping buzz that made Valeth's skin crawl. "We tracked you across half the sector, and we will not lose you now. Your father will pay handsomely for your return, or perhaps we will sell you to the highest bidder instead." Valeth pressed herself tighter against the container, but she knew it was hopeless. The HFY had excellent senses, and they would find her within moments. She thought about running again, but her legs were shaking with exhaustion, and she knew she could not outrun these hunters. One of the HFY suddenly pointed toward her hiding spot and let out a triumphant, clicking sound. They had found her. The 4 raiders moved toward her position, spreading out to cut off any escape route, and Valeth felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. This was how it would end, she thought, captured by slavers on a lawless station, a life reduced to a bargaining chip or a commodity to be sold. She would never see her home again, never walk through the crystal gardens of the palace, never feel the warmth of her family's love. The lead HFY reached the container and peered around it, its mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile. "There you are, precious one," it buzzed, reaching for her with a clawed hand. And then the lights went out. The cargo bay plunged into complete darkness, and Valeth heard the HFY let out sounds of confusion and alarm. Something moved in the blackness, something fast and quiet. And then she heard a sharp impact followed by a strangled hiss. More sounds followed, quick and brutal. The noise of combat conducted with terrifying efficiency. Valeth heard bodies hitting the floor, heard the click of mandibles cut short by sudden violence, heard the raiders calling to each other in their native tongue with growing panic in their voices. It was over in seconds. The emergency lights flickered back to life, casting the cargo bay in a dim red glow, and Valeth saw 3 of the HFY lying motionless on the ground. The 4th, the scarred leader, was still alive but badly wounded, clutching at a deep gash in its thorax as it stared at something with obvious terror. Valeth followed its gaze and saw a figure standing between her and the wounded raider. The creature was unlike anything she had seen before, was shorter than an Etherian by nearly half a meter, with no bioluminescence, no natural armor, no visible weapons built into its body. It wore worn fabric clothing covered by scuffed armor plates, and it held a blade in one hand that dripped with dark HFY blood. The creature moved toward the wounded raider, and Valeth watched as it dispatched the last enemy with a single efficient strike. There was no hesitation, no cruelty, just the cold precision of a predator completing its work. Then the creature turned to face her, and Valeth got her first clear look at it. The being had smooth skin in a strange pinkish tone, with dark hair cut short on its head, and two forward-facing eyes that fixed on her with unsettling intensity. Those eyes, Valeth noticed with a chill, were the eyes of a predator, positioned for hunting rather than watching for danger. The creature studied her for a moment, then holstered its blade and extended an open hand toward her. "You're a long way from home, Your Highness," it said, and Valeth was surprised to hear a voice that sounded almost normal, lacking the clicks or growls of most alien species. "We need to move now." Valeth stared at the offered hand, her mind racing with questions and fears. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "Where are you?" The creature glanced toward the cargo bay entrance, where distant sounds suggested more enemies were approaching. "Questions later," it said firmly. "Moving now, unless you want to meet more of these friends." Valeth looked at the fallen HFY, then at the strange being who had killed them with such ease, and she made a decision born of desperation. She took the offered hand and allowed the creature to pull her to her feet. The being's grip was surprisingly strong, and its skin was warm, almost hot compared to the cool touch of Etherian flesh. "This way," it said, releasing her hand and moving toward a maintenance hatch that Valeth had not noticed before. "Stay close, stay quiet, and do exactly what I tell you." They slipped through the hatch into a narrow access tunnel, and Valeth had to crouch to follow her mysterious rescuer through the cramped space. The being moved with confidence through the darkness, clearly familiar with these hidden passages that ran through the station's infrastructure behind them. Valeth heard the HFY enter the cargo bay and discover their fallen comrades. Their enraged clicking filled the air, and she heard them begin searching for the one who had killed their friends. "Faster," her guide whispered, and Valeth forced her tired legs to move more quickly through the narrow tunnel. They climbed through shafts, crawled through vents, and squeezed through gaps that seemed barely wide enough for their bodies. The creature led her with honoring certainty, always knowing which turn to take, which path to follow finally. They emerged into a small chamber filled with pipes and machinery, and the being gestured for Valeth to sit on an overturned crate. "We should be safe here for a few minutes," it said, checking a small device on its wrist. "They'll search the main corridors first." Valeth sat heavily on the crate, her body aching and her mind spinning with confusion. She studied her rescuer in the dim light of the chamber, trying to understand what she was looking at. "You killed 4 HFY raiders," she said slowly. "Alone, in darkness, in mere seconds." The creature was checking a weapon now, some kind of primitive projectile device that looked crude compared to Etherian technology. They weren't expecting resistance. It replied without looking up. "Made it easier. Who are you?" Valeth asked again. "And please, I must know what species you are, because I have studied the Galactic Codex extensively, and I do not recognize you at all." The being looked up then, and something that might have been amusement flickered across its strange face. "Name's Marcus Cole," it said, "and I'm human." Valeth felt the air freeze in her lungs. Human she knew of humans, of course, for every educated Etherian learned about the various species of the galaxy. Humans were a young race from a small planet called Earth, located in an unremarkable star system far from the galactic core. They were considered utterly ordinary by galactic standards, possessing no special abilities, no natural weapons, no extraordinary strength or intelligence. The galactic community regarded them as so unremarkable that they were barely worth mentioning. They lived short lives, possessed no telepathy or bioluminescence, and were not even permitted to travel in most core systems. "That is impossible," Valeth whispered, her voice barely audible. "Humans are weak and primitive. They could not possibly kill for Kethvari in the dark." Marcus interrupted, and that unsettling smile appeared on his face again. "Yeah, we get that a lot." He finished checking his weapon and stood, moving toward the chamber's exit with quiet steps. More questions later. "Princess," he said over his shoulder, "right now, we need to get you off this station before the entire Kethvari hunting party figures out where you are." Valeth rose to follow, her mind struggling to reconcile what she had witnessed with everything she had been taught a human, a member of the weakest and most ordinary species in the galaxy, had just saved her life with skills that would put an Etherian royal guard to shame. Nothing made sense anymore. And Valeth realized that her understanding of the universe had just become far more complicated. She followed the human into the darkness. Questions. They moved through the bowels of Nexus 7 like ghosts, slipping past patrols and avoiding crowded corridors with a precision that amazed. Valeth Marcus seemed to know every hidden passage, every blind spot in the station's surveillance systems, every place where they could move without being seen. He had been on this station for a long time, Valeth realized, and he had learned its secrets the way a predator learns the paths of its hunting ground. The Kethvari were everywhere now, their clicking language echoing through the corridors as they searched for the princess and whoever had killed their comrade. As Valeth heard announcements over the station's communication system, offering rewards for information about an Etherian female traveling with an unknown companion. The price was enough to make anyone on this lawless station turn traitor in an instant. "We need to reach the eastern docking bay," Marcus explained in a low voice as they paused in a junction between two maintenance tunnels. "I have contacts there who can get us a ship, but it is on the other side of the station. That will take hours," Valeth said with growing worry. "The Kethvari will find us long before then." "Not if we are smart about it," Marcus replied, and there was a confidence in his voice that Valeth found both reassuring and strange. They continued on, and Valeth watched her human guide with growing curiosity. Every movement he made was deliberate and efficient, wasting no energy, making no unnecessary sound. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, noting exits and threats and opportunities with the alertness of a creature that had evolved to survive in dangerous places. They encountered their first obstacle at a junction where two corridors crossed. Finding a group of rough-looking aliens blocking the path, Marcus pulled Valeth into the shadows and studied the situation with narrowed eyes. "Bounty hunters," he whispered. "Probably looking for you, but they are not with the Kethvari. Can we go around them?" Valeth asked hopefully. "That would add an hour to our journey and take us through Kethvari-controlled territory," Marcus answered. "No, we go through," before Valeth could protest. Marcus was moving, stepping out of the shadows with his hands visible and empty. The bounty hunters turned to face him, weapons raised, and their leader, a massive four-armed creature with blue skin, stepped forward with a sneer. "Human," the leader growled. "Step aside. We have business here, and it does not concern your kind." "Just passing through," Marcus said calmly. "No trouble." "The Etherian," another bounty hunter demanded, its multiple eyes scanning the shadows where Valeth hid. "We know she is here. We saw the heat signature. Bring her out, and maybe we let you walk away." Marcus tilted his head slightly, and Valeth saw something change in his posture, a subtle shift that made him seem somehow more dangerous. That is not going to happen, he said quietly. The bounty hunters laughed, and their leader raised a massive weapon that looked capable of punching through starship armor. One little human thinks it can stop us? It mocked. Your species dies easier than anyone in the galaxy. We die easy, Marcus agreed. And then he muttered Velith had never seen anything like it. Human exploded into action with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature without any visible enhancements. He ducked under the leader's weapon blast, closed the distance in a heartbeat, and struck the large alien in a specific point on its throat that made it collapse like a puppet with cut strings. The other bounty hunters tried to respond, but Marcus was already among them, using their own bodies as shields, turning their weapons against each other, exploiting their confusion with ruthless efficiency. In 10 seconds, 4 bounty hunters lay unconscious on the ground, and Marcus stood among them, breathing only slightly harder than before. He looked at Velith and gestured for her to follow quickly before someone comes to investigate the noise. They ran through the junction and into the corridors beyond, and Velith found herself staring at the human with new eyes. How did you do that? She demanded when they finally paused to catch their breath in an empty storage room. You have no enhanced strength, no special abilities. You are just human, Marcus finished for her. And he actually smiled as if she had said something amusing. Princess, let me tell you something about my species that the Galactic Codex probably did not mention. He sat on a crate and began checking his weapons while he spoke, his hands moving with practiced ease. Humans evolved on a planet that wanted to kill us every single day, he explained. Earth has extreme temperatures, massive predators, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, natural disasters that could destroy civilizations in hours. Velith listened with growing fascination as the human continued. We had no claws, no armor, no venom, no special senses, nothing that should have let us survive. But we did survive, and do you know how? She shook her head, genuinely curious despite the danger they were in. We adapted, Marcus said. We learned, we cooperated, we refused to give up no matter how bad things got. Our ancestors chased prey across entire continents, running for hours and days until the animals simply collapsed from exhaustion. Persistence predation, Velith murmured, remembering a term from her xenobiology studies. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. And when running was not enough, we made tools. And when tools were not enough, we made better tools. We are not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species in the galaxy, Princess, but we are the most stubborn. He stood and moved to the door, checking the corridor beyond. Every other species in the galaxy evolved past their survival instincts, he said. They became civilized, comfortable, safe. But humans never got that luxury. We are still running on 1,000,000 years of do whatever it takes to survive. Velith thought about his words as they continued their journey through the station. She had been taught that humans were unremarkable, a footnote in galactic history. But what she was witnessing told a very different story. They encountered more obstacles as they traveled. But each time Marcus found a way through, he set traps for pursuing HFY using nothing but scavenged materials and knowledge of the station systems. He talked their way past suspicious guards by reading their body language and knowing exactly what to say. He fought when he had to, using techniques that turned an opponent's strength against them, exploiting weaknesses that Velith would never have noticed at one point. They were cornered by a group of HFY in a narrow corridor with no apparent escape. Velith felt despair beginning to settle into her heart. But Marcus simply looked up at the ceiling panels with a calculating expression. Can you climb? He asked her. Yes. I suppose, she answered uncertainly. Marcus jumped, grabbed an overhead pipe, and swung himself up to a maintenance hatch that Velith had not even seen. He reached down and pulled her up after him. and they crawled through the station's ventilation system while the HFY searched the corridor below in frustrated confusion. "How do you know all of this?" Valeth asked as they emerged into another section of the station. "The hidden paths, the weaknesses in their search patterns, everything. I have been on Nexus 7 for 3 years," Marcus explained. "Doing odd jobs, learning the station, making contacts, and yes, making enemies. Why?" Valeth could not understand why anyone would choose to live in such a terrible place. Marcus was quiet for a moment. And when he spoke again, his voice held a weight that had not been there before. "I'm looking for someone," he said simply. "Someone who was taken by slavers and brought to this region of space. The search has led me here, and I will not leave until I find them." Valeth wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her that this was not the time. They continued on in silence, and she found herself thinking about this strange human with new respect. He was far from home, alone in a hostile place, searching for someone he cared about. And yet he had stopped to save a princess he did not know and owed nothing to. Why had he done that? She wondered what drove a creature like Marcus Cole to risk everything for a stranger. The answers would have to wait, for they were getting closer to the docking bay. And the greatest challenges still lay ahead, but Valeth was beginning to understand that everything she had been taught about humans was wrong. They were not weak or ordinary or unremarkable. They were something else entirely. Something that the galaxy had gravely underestimated, and she was starting to feel very glad that this particular human had chosen to save her life. The journey through Nexus 7 had taken its toll on both of them, but Marcus kept pushing forward with a determination that Valeth found almost frightening. His body had to be exhausted. His muscles had to be screaming for rest, yet he showed no sign of slowing down when Valeth stumbled from fatigue. He simply adjusted their pace and found a safer route that required less running. They stopped to rest in what appeared to be an abandoned medical bay, and Valeth collapsed onto a dusty examination table with a groan of relief. Her feet ached, her lungs burned, and every part of her body reminded her that Etherians were not built for this kind of extended physical stress. Marcus moved through the room with methodical precision, checking for threats and searching for anything useful. He found a medkit and brought it to Valeth, cleaning the cut on her forehead with gentle hands that seemed strange on a creature who had killed so many in the past few hours. "You have injuries too," Valeth noted, pointing to the blood seeping through his shirt where a HFY claw had caught him during their last encounter. Marcus glanced down at the wound and shrugged. "It is not deep," he said dismissively. "I have had worse. Let me see," Valeth insisted. Surprising herself with the firmness in her voice, Marcus raised an eyebrow but pulled aside his shirt to reveal the gash along his ribs. Valeth applied the medical supplies with careful movements, and as she worked, she noticed the scars that covered his torso. There were dozens of them, some old and faded, others more recent. A map of violence written on his flesh. "You have been in many fights," she observed quietly. "Part of the job," Marcus replied. "When you are looking for someone in places like this, you make enemies." Valeth finished treating his wound and sat back, studying the human with open curiosity. "Tell me about Earth," she said. "Tell me about the place that created something like you." Marcus was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice held a distant quality, as if he was seeing things that existed only in his memory. "Earth is beautiful," he said. "Green forests, blue oceans, mountains that touch the sky, and yes, it is dangerous. More dangerous than most galactic cities could survive, but it is home." "What kind of dangers?" Valeth asked. Genuinely curious, Marcus smiled slightly, and she noticed that when he spoke about his homeworld, some of the hardness left his face. "Where do I start?" He said, "We have predators that can kill with a single bite. Venomous creatures that hide in the most unexpected places. Weather that can destroy entire cities. earthquakes that collapse mountains, diseases that have wiped out millions. Valeth felt a chill run through her at his words. And your species survived all of this without special abilities? We did more than survive, Marcus answered. And there was pride in his voice now. We thrived. We conquered every environment on our planet, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. We spread to every corner of Earth and made it ours. He leaned forward, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel like prey. Do you know what the most dangerous thing on Earth is, Princess? Valeth shook her head. Humans, Marcus said simply. We are the apex predators of a death world. We hunted everything else to the point where we had to make laws to protect the other species, not because they were dangerous to us, but because we were too dangerous to them. Valeth absorbed this information with growing unease. She had been taught that humans were harmless, that they posed no threat to the established order of the galaxy. But sitting here with this scarred and deadly creature, she was beginning to understand how wrong that teaching had been. Why are you not more prominent in galactic society? She asked, with capabilities like yours. Your species should be among the powers of the galaxy, Marcus laughed. But there was bitterness in the sound. The elder races made sure that would not happen, he explained. When humanity first reached the stars, we were eager, ambitious, ready to take our place among the galactic community. But the Etherians and the other old species saw us differently. What do you mean? They saw our history, Marcus said. The wars, the violence, the way we treated each other and everything else on our planet. And they were afraid. Valeth felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, for she knew the policies her people had supported regarding humans. They confined us to our home system for decades. Marcus continued. They restricted our access to advanced technology. They spread propaganda about us being primitive and weak. And when we finally earned limited travel rights, they made sure we were never given positions of real authority. I did not know. Valeth said softly. Most people do not, Marcus replied without accusation in his voice. The humans who venture out into the galaxy learn to keep their heads down, to accept being treated as second-class citizens, to let other species underestimate us. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the chaotic corridors of Nexus 7. But places like this are different, he said. Out here, beyond the laws and prejudices of the core systems, humans can be what we really are. We take the jobs no one else will do, go to the places no one else will go, and we survive. Is that why you came here? Valeth asked. To search for the person you lost? Marcus nodded, and his jaw tightened with emotion. My sister, he said. She was taken by slavers 5 years ago, sold somewhere in this region of space. I had been tracking her ever since, following every lead. No matter how small, 5 years, Valeth repeated with amazement. You have been searching for 5 years? And I will search for 50 more if I have to, Marcus said fiercely. She is family. She is blood. And humans do not abandon our own. Valeth thought about her own family. Safe in their crystal palaces, surrounded by guards and luxury, she had never faced real hardship. Never had to fight for anything. And yet this human had spent years in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy, searching for someone he loved. You saved me, she said quietly. You risked everything to help a stranger when you have your own mission. Why? Marcus turned to face her, and his expression softened slightly. Because you needed help, he said simply. Because I could not walk past someone in danger and do nothing. Because that is what humans do. Valeth felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the prejudices she had carried her entire life. I was taught that humans lacked empathy, she admitted. That you were violent and selfish and cared only for yourselves. And what do you think now? Marcus, Valeth considered the question carefully before answering. I think my teachers were fools, she said finally. I think they saw only what they wanted to see. a species that frightened them. And they invented stories to justify keeping you contained. Marcus smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. That is more insight than most galactic citizens ever achieve. He said. An alarm suddenly blared through the station, and both of them tensed. Marcus checked his communications device, and his expression grew serious. The HFY have locked down the docking bays, he reported. They know we are heading for the ships. Then we are trapped, Valis said with despair. No, Marcus replied. And that familiar determination returned to his face. We are not trapped. We just need to change the plan. He began packing up their supplies. And Valith saw that fire in his eyes that she was coming to recognize. What are you going to do? She asked. Something very human. Marcus answered with a grim smile. I am going to make some noise, attract attention. Draw the HFY to me while you slip through to the docking bay. No. Valith grabbed his arm with surprising strength. You will die. Marcus looked at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. Maybe, he admitted. But maybe not. Remember what I told you about humans. Princess, we are very hard to kill, and we never, ever give up. Before Valith could argue further, he pressed a small device into her palm. This is a communicator, he explained. It will lead you to my contacts in the docking bay. Tell them Marcus sent you. They will get you to safety. I will not leave you to die for me, Valith said fiercely. Not again, not like Morale and the guards. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then stay close and follow my lead, he said. Because we are doing this together, and I promise you, Your Highness, we will both walk out of this station alive. Valith nodded. Feeling a strange mixture of fear and hope swirling in her chest, she did not fully understand this human. But she was beginning to trust him, and in a place like Nexus 7, surrounded by enemies, trust was the most valuable thing in the universe. The eastern docking bay was a vast chamber filled with ships of every size and design. From small personal transports to massive cargo freighters that could carry enough goods to supply a small planet Velith could see their destination through the grimy windows of the observation corridor. A medium-sized vessel was sleek. Lines that looked fast enough to outrun anything the HFY might send after them, but between them and that ship stood an army. The HFY commander had gathered over 24 warriors in the docking bay, forming a defensive line that blocked all approaches to the waiting vessels. The insectoid raiders stood in disciplined ranks, their weapons ready, their compound eyes scanning for any sign of the princess they had been hunting. There are too many, Valith whispered with despair in her voice. Even you cannot fight through all of them. Marcus studied the enemy formation with calculating eyes. And instead of fear, she saw something like anticipation on his face. You are right, he agreed. I cannot do this alone. He pulled out his communicator and spoke into it with quiet urgency. This is Cole. I am calling in every favor I am owed. Eastern Docking Bay, 5 minutes. Bring everything you have. Static crackled through the device, and then voices began responding, one after another. Chun here. I'm on my way. Kovacs. Inbound with 2 more. Rodriguez, we hear you, brother. Hold tight. Okonkwo, I have got your back. Always. Valith listened with growing confusion as more voices joined the chorus. At least 12 responses from across the station. Who are all these people? She asked. Humans, Marcus answered with a fierce grin. Dock workers, mechanics, traders, mercenaries. All the forgotten people that the galaxy overlooks. I have spent 3 years on this station, Princess, and I have made friends. But why would they risk their lives for a stranger? Valith could not comprehend it. Because I asked them to, Marcus said simply. And because that is what we do. They moved to a position overlooking the docking bay. And Valeth watched as figures began emerging from shadows and side passages all around the chamber. They came in ones and twos, slipping into position with the same quiet efficiency that Marcus had displayed throughout their journey. They were humans. She realized all of them. The overlooked workers and wanderers who kept the station running while the other species ignored their existence. The HFY commander noticed the movement and barked orders to its warriors. But it was already too late. The humans had surrounded them. Marcus stepped out into the open, his weapons drawn, and his voice rang out across the docking bay. "This is your one chance," he called to the HFY. "Walk away now and you live. Stay and fight, and you will find out why the galaxy fears my species." The commander clicked its mandibles in what might have been laughter. "Humans," it spat with contempt. "The weakest race in the galaxy threatens us? There are barely 20 of you, and we are the terror of 100 systems." "Let me explain something to you," Marcus replied calmly. "Where you see 20 individuals, I see one weapon with 20 parts. You think numbers matter, but you have never faced humans fighting together." The commander raised its weapon and fired. What happened next would stay with Valeth for the rest of her very long life. The humans moved as one, a single organism with 20 bodies and one purpose. They did not charge blindly or scatter in fear. They flowed like water around obstacles, covering each other, communicating with gestures and glances that seemed almost telepathic. Every human knew exactly where every other human was, and they used that knowledge with devastating effect. Marcus led the charge, and Valeth watched in amazement as he and his companions tore through the HFY formation. They used the raiders' own tactics against them, exploiting the spaces between warriors, attacking from unexpected angles, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. A human woman with gray hair fought beside Marcus, moving with a speed that belied her age, while a young man barely out of adolescence provided covering fire with cold precision. An older human with mechanical augments grappled with a HFY twice his size and somehow threw it to the ground, while another human, small and slight, slipped between the massive raiders like a ghost, disabling them with precisely placed strikes. The HFY were warriors bred for combat, terrifying creatures that had conquered dozens of worlds. But against these humans, they were helpless. They could not predict where the attacks would come from, could not coordinate their defense against an enemy that fought as perfectly as a single mind in multiple bodies. The commander tried to rally its forces, but Marcus was already upon it. They fought in the blur of claws and blade, the massive insectoid using its 4 arms and natural weapons against the small human, who should have been easy prey. But Marcus was not prey. He absorbed blows that should have broken him, kept fighting through wounds that would have stopped any other species, and his eyes never lost that cold focus that Valeth found so frightening and so magnificent. The commander fell with a crash that echoed through the docking bay, and suddenly the battle was over. The remaining HFY fled, scrambling over their fallen comrades in their desperate escape, their fearsome reputation shattered by a handful of humans who should never have been able to defeat them. Marcus turned to Valeth, covered in blood that was mostly not his own, and extended his hand. "Time to go." "Your Highness." They boarded the ship along with the other humans, and within minutes they were soaring away from Nexus 7, leaving the lawless station behind. 4 Varls stood at the viewport, watching the stars streak past as they entered faster than light travel, and she felt the weight of everything she had witnessed pressing down upon her. Marcus appeared beside her, his wounds now properly bandaged, the exhaustion finally showing on his weathered face. "Thank you," Valeth said, and the words felt completely inadequate for what he and his companions had done. "Just doing what humans do." "Marcus," replied Valeth, turned to face him fully, and she felt tears forming in her eyes. "All my life, I was taught that my species was superior," she said. That Ethereans stood at the peak of galactic civilization, that other species existed below us, especially humans. She looked around the ship at the humans who had risked everything for a princess they did not know. I was taught that you were weak, that you were primitive, that you were nothing special, she continued. But I watched you fight creatures that terrify half the galaxy. And you did not just survive, you won. Princess, Marcus began. But Valeth was not finished. You have no natural weapons, she said. No special abilities, no telepathy, no enhanced strength. Your lives are short. Your technology is limited. And yet, you defeated an army of Kethvari with 20 people. She met Marcus's eyes. And for the first time, she truly saw him. Not as a primitive or a curiosity, but as something far more significant. Why? She asked. How? Marcus considered the question for a long moment before answering. Because giving up is not in our nature, he said. Because every human on this ship has faced impossible odds before and refused to accept defeat. Because when one of us asks for help, the others come. No matter the cost, he gestured toward his companions, who were tending to each other's wounds and sharing quiet words of comfort. We are not the strongest, fastest, or smartest species in the galaxy, he said. But we are the most determined, and when humans stand together, there is nothing in the universe that can stop us. Valeth stood in awe out of the fighting she had witnessed, though that had been remarkable, not of the tactical brilliance, or the physical endurance, or the sheer stubborn refusal to die. She stood in awe of something far simpler and far more powerful: compassion, loyalty, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, even strangers. These humans had risked their lives not for money or power or glory, but simply because one of their own had asked them to help someone in need. It was the most magnificent thing Valeth had ever seen. When I return to the Dominion, she said slowly, I will tell my people the truth about humanity. What truth is that? Marcus, asked Valeth, looked out at the stars, thinking of the vast galaxy and all the species who had dismissed humans as unimportant. That you are not weak, she said. That you are not primitive or unremarkable or harmless. She turned back to Marcus with fire in her galaxy-shifting eyes. I will tell them that humanity is the most remarkable species I have ever encountered, she declared, and that the galaxy makes a grave mistake in underestimating you. Marcus smiled, and for once there was no hardness in it. Just warmth and something like hope. We do not need anyone to speak for us, Princess, he said gently. We have been proving ourselves in the shadows for decades, one day at a time, one impossible victory after another. Then let me help you step out of the shadows, Valeth offered. Let me show the galaxy what I have seen. Marcus looked at the other humans on the ship, and some unspoken communication passed between them. Maybe it is time, the gray-haired woman said with a nod. Humanity has been waiting long enough, the young man agreed. Marcus turned back to Valeth and extended his hand, not to pull her up this time, but as an equal, as a friend. Then I suppose we have work to do. Your Heinz. Valeth took his hand, feeling the warm strength of his grip, and she smiled. Please, she said, call me Valeth. The ship carried them toward the heart of the galaxy, toward the Etherean Dominion, and a future that neither humans nor Ethereans could yet imagine. Behind them, on Nexus 7, the survivors,